Okay.
And that helped wake me up, realizing that there was something happening with education. So I started going down the rabbit holes, stumbled on the LGBT agenda in education, had a conversation with our son's principal at his school, and just said, my son's not learning, that were quite eye-opening, and really came to be understood that Indiana plays a very pivotal.
See, Reisman, maybe hold up one of her books, the second one there, Kinsey, or Sexual Sabotage. Tell us a little bit about who Dr. Reisman is.
And
the boy was 16.
Right.
Yeah.
And he'd been looking at his dad's Playboy magazines.
Of course he had.
And so she decided that she started doing some investigation work as to why.
Unleashed a plague of corruption and contagion on America. Dr. Reisman, who was this mad scientist that you're referring to?
Well, a lot of people really sort of gender reproduction, the Kinsey Institute, and he, yes, was a man who was involved in the sexual torture of hundreds of children in his own work, and I keep trying. Returning from overseas, they were traumatized, the nation was traumatized. And a couple years later, 1948, Kinsey's book comes out called Sexual Behavior and our parents were doing sexually, and he was going to reveal the real facts and lift the curtain off what we were hiding all this time. And what unfiltered down to every place.
Who funded his study?
Yes, well, the Rockefeller Foundation not only funded his study, but when he was looked like here. Oh, because they defined him as conservative. Americans would never have accepted a man who was as, well, he was a bi-homosexual. There's big argument at which the damage to his lower nether regions because he was so abusive to himself. So this was not a normal guy. And I had no idea when I started on this thing. I really didn't. I just copied off his charts and graphs with this little 2-month-old baby and with this little 5-year-old and and it took me years to figure out why, and it turned out that, yes, Kinsey's research became the foundation for major changes, every major change in our change for the West worldwide. Research, by the way, remember, Liam Neeson appeared as Kinsey in a major feature film, Fox feature film, saying, you know, he was this the base aspect. Look, he's the guy who revolutionized sex for us and said you could do all these things with no downside. Well, okay, people. PBS, ABC, NBC. And my daughter was sexually assaulted by a 13-year-old boy who lived upstairs, came from an intact family. following issue, which made me the principal investigator for U.S. Department of Justice study on images of children crime and violence in Playboy, Penthouse, and Hustler. And will then abuse children who have not seen the material, but the older child has. And you don't get the extended family together and discuss with everyone in the family what is going on with this pornography and find out if
in the later part of the discussion.
Ones that her friends were referencing.
Literally, when you brought them out here, and we were like, you brought these into a church. Like, it's almost like, you know.
Well, these are came in 1965.
Yes.
Okay, my mom was born in 1960. This is not that long ago, folks.
Yeah.
So what did they know before 1965? And the Supreme sex offenders don't reoffend, and pedophiles don't have more than one victim. And children aren't really affected by pedophilia, and women aren't really hurt by rape. That's what book as many years as, a tax evader. You thank Kinsey for that.
Oh, absolutely.
So what I'm thinking is, you mentioned one,
Because this was a timeless plan.
so it's Satan.
It's a timeless
Ultimately, it is the devil at its core, which is really good news for the church. Because so, Leah, when it comes to the actual, what I would say, the inception, the conception
That's the root.
moment, the act.
day Eve with
A fruit.
and what did he say? Did God really say?
Right.
So the question is, to every American, to every world, you had to question, and you had to get kids up wholly inadequate to the government of any other people. Our founding fathers knew that you had to rely on a creator. If you have no creator, if you have no creation, we have no union.
When we brought the Nazis over here after World War II,
Sure.
put them in our institutions and started the brainwashing from the
Yeah.
top down. And so now what we're seeing in our schools, as I tell people, we are now seeing values and beliefs, and then they have to change them, and then they have to radicalize them and refreeze them in that status and send them out as radical activists. And
Isn't it?
colors, and they tell the children, if you're this female butterfly, you can be this color. If you're a boy female or boy butterfly, you can be this color.
Orange and blue.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they give them a combine you want, and it can change from day to day. Maybe a butterfly one day, maybe something else the next day.
Right.
Yep.
And so with the butterfly, they talk the non-binary. So they'll have a butterfly and they'll say, well, it's a blue wing and an orange wing. Is there non-binary? So there's a spectrum
Right.
of gender.
Right.
And that's kind of what they teach. And also in this amazing documentary, it talks about how you can rewire the brain, but children fight against that, and how it's child abuse. Maybe kind of discuss how that happens when you're trying. Kids are born knowing male and female,
Right.
and they even just you can see little boys over here and little girls over here up until puberty. It kind of just, and then you have to rewire it that we are not two genders.
Right. And so I equate that to struggle sessions. So they
yeah.
put the children through struggle sessions at school, right?
Right.
Circles, whatever it may be, so that you are pressurized into becoming or believing whatever it is they want you to adapt to. And
Right.
so that is true. And it's child abuse. They
It is.
essentially got the schools participating in psychological therapy sessions that they're not equipped to do. And so they're utilizing these captured individuals, these captured children in our schools in order to create Mao's America.
And they're doing it, and we'll get to the base of it, but children are being sexualized in school. We know it's sexual curriculum, right? And to sexualize a child is child abuse. To introduce these images.
Sexual predators and comprehensive sex education both break down inhibitions. That's what they start with. They also gain trust with the child and then slowly start to get them towards sexual activity.
Anything goes. You are teaching children adult child sex, you're teaching transgender issues, and children are moldable and influenced by that.
They said, okay, now we need you and your team to be able to explain what homosexuality is to a 4-year-old student.
To introduce this kind of material at that age, frankly, it's child abuse.
You're going to teach our children that it's okay for any two children of any age, of any sex, to have sexual intercourse with each other as long as two components are present. One's using a condom and they both give consent. Did I hear that correctly?
It's not a neutral venue. There's no such thing. Okay, the schools are doing your job. They are discipling your children, but they're not discipling them in the faith of Jesus Christ.
It's only the exceptional child that even survives that system. Most do not survive, most have not survived.
They believe that children are sexual from birth and that they deserve and have the right to be sexually active and to seek sexual pleasure. And if anyone is stopping them from that, then you are judging and oppressing them.
Even kindergarten now, they're wanting to teach them more and more perverse information and acts and put that into the children's minds. And once that poison is in a child's mind, it doesn't leave. They'll always remember what they learned. And it's by design, it's orchestrated.
In my humble opinion, it will be worse before it gets better.
The mom's reading these pornographic books at the school boards, and they cut off their mic and they say, you can't read that here.
Hello, Navarro. Suck any good lately. What's wrong, Navarro? I think you like a big in your mouth. Ha ha ha. Page 23. The other boy, page 23. Here it is. What's the educational benefit of talking about What's the educational benefit of talking about that? Is that going to help someone on the SAT score? Hear me kind. Get a shot of that. She can care less. That's a sign. She needs to put down her sign. A second. Oh, you're putting me out. For what? For asking you to abide by the rules. A board member held up a sign, but the audience couldn't hold up signs. This is tyranny, and we're dealing with a corrupt government system.
Well, wait a minute. How come these can be read in schools by kids? There's a loophole, isn't there?
Yeah, there's an obscenity loophole that 43 states have.
Wow.
That allows schools and public libraries to distribute legally pornographic and obscene material. So, and that is because Alfred Kinsey did what he did that brought in Hugh Hefner and his pornography industry, which is very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And so many of what we have found in Indiana is many of our legislators are bought off by the library lobbyists. So there's a lot of money that
library because everybody wants their book to be bought.
Exactly.
If you get your book in every library, you know.
We actually had a team member that we asked him to do some deep dive research on the big 5 publishers.
Oh, wow.
And he uncovered direct connections to the WEF and the United Nations.
Of course.
So this is coming down to those sustainable development goals at the highest level.
Right.
And not only that, to pervert our children, but also to promote climate change.
Sure.
The climate change hoax. So the same 5 publishers are creating all of this propaganda material, whether it be perversion or it be the climate hoax. And so it's interesting that all this propaganda is being utilized to thought reform our children.
So that makes, hang on, this is a really good point. And this is because I want to get back to eugenics and population control, because you just linked 2 things that seem completely separate to this agenda, but they're not. Because when we think about climate control, what is the ultimate thing? We must reduce the surplus population. I think of Charles Dickens, right?
Absolutely.
At the foundation of all of it is the devil's mission to steal, kill, and destroy, to destroy God's seed, to destroy the fruit. We talk about the fruit. That has been his mission from the beginning. So Leah, going back to eugenics and Darwin and all of that, like, so this plan, we're seeing it now with population control, with climate control and all of that, but it's been the same mission for over 100 years.
Everybody's going to have a religion. If you don't have Christianity, you're going to have Hinduism, you're going to have Buddhism, you're going to have Maoism. Atheism isn't a religion. It's humanism. It's putting humanism, it's evolution. Okay. So atheism puts the survival of the fittest and a set of rules and a set of laws, and you're trying to create a utopia, because the essence of all religions is to make a better society. So you've got the isms: humanism, progressivism, communism, Nazism, socialism. Every single one of those are all of the same ism. Their father is Darwin, okay, who actually was not only a racist, but he was the father of eugenics, because eugenics is supposed to be natural selection, natural breeding, and it seems so great. The survival of the fittest, and that's how we got here. And there's a truth to it. You know, there's 2 of each kind on the ark. The natural, you could call it, evolution of animals from the ark. It's micro versus macro, right? God starts and creates the kinds, and then there's variations amongst the kinds, okay? Darwin's finches were variations amongst the kinds, but he never found a connection between a finch and a crocodile. There's no connection. There's no connections between the kinds. So in order to bring about what they wanted to bring about, which was utopia, they had to fight against Christianity. Christianity was about, and at the time, especially the turn of the century, from the 18th century into the 19th century, you have the birth of this nation. You have everything's moving forward. People are highly educated. They're loving God. They're loving each other, and we're creating a more perfect union. The devil had to counter that with something, and he says, "I have an idea. I have an idea. We're going to show you how to create a more perfect kind." And we're going to focus on humans. And in order to do that, you have to eliminate the feeble-minded. You have to eliminate the syphilitic. You have to eliminate alcoholism. You have to eliminate, many people do not know, Alexander Graham Bell, eugenicist. So the eugenics movement is the baby, the child of Charles Darwin's A Theory of Evolution, which is why
saying about Alexander Graham Bell.
He said that every deaf person should be sterilized. If you pull yourself out from creationism, if you pull yourself out from God, and you're just thinking logically, 2 deaf people should not procreate. They should not be allowed to marry. So he advocated for that. And now we can step back now and say, whoa, that was a bridge too far. The atheism that took over and the void that filled, and that's why the fight was against creation. And that's why we had the Scopes monkey trial, okay, which actually was won, and many people don't know, by Williams Jennings Bryan, who ran against McKinley in an election. And Williams Jennings Bryan was an ardent creationist.
Even though he was a Democrat.
And he was a Christian. So in the election in 1893, and I'll just throw this in here, there were 3 main guys: Rockefeller, Carnegie, and JP Morgan. All of them eugenics, by the way. They were controlling the world. JP Morgan controlled the banks. Carnegie controlled the steel, Rockefeller controlled the oil and everything else, and together, separately, they were enemies. But Williams Jennings Bryan said, "I'm coming for you, Carnegie. I'm coming for you, Rockefeller. I'm going to break you up. I'm going to trust bust you." So they sat down and they said, We got to buy a presidency. Who do we buy? Don't care if it's a Democrat. Don't care if it's a Republican. We just got to buy somebody. I got somebody. I got somebody in Ohio. I got William McKinley. I got him. We're gonna put him in our pocket. Okay.
The Rockefeller Foundation helped found the German eugenics program and even funded the program that Josef Mengele worked in before he went to Auschwitz. Carnegie's Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory was the base of the eugenics record office in America. Its assistant director said, "It has been proven that sterilization is necessary to the well-being of the state. Most importantly, the prohibition of procreation for certain members of degenerate tribes needed to be accompanied by special support for marriages hereditarily valuable." One of America's earliest conspiracies is portrayed in the History Channel series, The Men Who Built America. The monsters in our conspiracy, Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Morgan, joined together to buy a presidency. Sound familiar?
After inheriting and expanding his father's banking empire, J.P. Morgan is now among the most powerful men in the nation. His influence over the country is matched by only two other men: Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller have been rivals for decades. And that competition has driven both men to incredible heights. At the peak of their power, J.P. Morgan, John Rockefeller, and Andrew Carnegie are worth the modern equivalent of over $1 trillion combined. More than the entire net worth of the 40 richest people alive today. The gap between the rich and the poor is as big as it's ever been. Over 90% of Americans survive on less than $100 per month, while the average worker earns barely $1 a day. Working conditions in factories across the country are almost unbearable. In a single year, 1 out of every 11 steel workers will die while on the job. As the country approaches the 1896 presidential election, America's poor are desperate and without hope. One man sees the opportunity to harness their anger, and in the process, propel himself to the White House. William Jennings Bryan.
This election of 1896 proved to be a pivotal moment in America's history. No longer would candidates be chosen by the people, but instead every candidate since 1896 has been selected by big businessmen and big bankers.
I will tear down these trusts. Do you hear me, Carnegie? Do you hear me, Rockefeller?
This is the electorate that would rally behind the people's candidate.
Bryan's emergence is the biggest threat the Titans have ever faced. He promises to dismantle their companies and to not rest until they're behind bars.
What do you think? The Republican Party has a good candidate.
No. We have to buy our own president.
This is the birth of conspiring to buy a presidency.
The Titans throw their full support behind the candidacy of Ohio Governor William McKinley. Rockefeller, Morgan, and Carnegie each give over $200,000 to McKinley, the equivalent of $20 million today. The campaign is by far the most expensive in American history, and McKinley outspends Bryan by a factor of 5 to 1. But they don't just fund their candidate. The group wields tremendous influence, and they aren't shy about using it. Suggesting headlines and orchestrating PR campaigns aimed at getting McKinley elected. America is at a crossroads. A small group of men have created the modern country, building unimagined empires in oil, steel, and electricity. But now, those empires are being threatened. The 1896 U.S. presidential election is the battleground to determine the future of the nation. And the Titans have done everything they can to make sure the election goes their way.
After McKinley's election, a number of the issues that had bothered the big businessmen conveniently went away.
And Carnegie, Rockefeller, and Morgan are set to become even more powerful than ever before.
And it's very interesting that you have this rewriting of history happening where kids don't know this. Right. William McKinley was literally assassinated because he sided with the big banks. He sided with the big business, and people were going out of business. They were destroying people's lives. And so you have this influx of just darkness entering the nation. The Christians are pulling back. And then along comes this end times theology that says, as the world gets worse and worse, it's the end times. So the Christians leave the system and almost ask and desire evil to come. Okay. They're leaving. They're telling their kids, don't go into politics. They're telling their kids, don't become lawyers, don't become doctors, just pull out of the system. And that void rushes right in. And who rushes in? The beginning of like Hollywood rushes in, the beginning of the writers. You've got George Bernard Shaw, Winston Churchill, Teddy Roosevelt, Jacques Cousteau, all ardent eugenics. Because why? I don't know about Winston Churchill's faith, but I do know that he said that unnatural growth of the feeble-minded and insane classes has to stop. We have to sterilize them. Okay. Jacques Cousteau wanted to eliminate 350,000 people a day.
That's a lot of people.
That's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. Even Helen Keller. Helen Keller was a eugenicist. She believed that we are sentimental to just allow people to be alive even. And people don't know that eugenics wasn't just about sterilizing or picking. There's positive eugenics and negative eugenics. Positive eugenics is breeding healthy people with bright eyes and healthy.
It's the Aryan race.
Yeah, it's the Aryan race. That's eugenics. Literally, Hitler was not born in a bubble. You guys,
he wasn't the only one. He had peers, he had counterparts. He was the only one that actually put
action to it.
No, they all put action to it. That's why we had the eugenics clinics.
Exactly.
But he put it on a global scale for the world to see.
And he put military behind it.
And he actually started physically killing people. So the eugenicists were just trying to do it the slow way and sterilize. And Hitler's going, hey, let's just kill off everybody, and then we'll breed the race that we would like.
But when you read their quotes, many of them are saying it's more than just not letting them to have children.
Yeah.
And they use the word breed, by the way. They don't say propagate children, have a family, right? They just say breed.
It reduces it to the lowest common denominator.
That's the animal mentality.
Yes.
Right? We're all just part of the animal species, according to Kinsey. And
exactly.
That's why he went after studying gall wasps at first when he was a pervert to begin with.
Right.
And then the next thing you know, he launches into sex studies. But it's interesting to know that our government not only experimented in eugenics, even globally, right? But they've experimented on humans all along.
Tuskegee project.
Yeah. So they experimented on blacks that way. And then they experimented by sending our military, they injected with a virus, sending them out globally and then spreading it across the globe. So it's not been unusual in our history for them to not only perform eugenics on selected species, right? But then to also use the rest of us as experiments. I mean, look what happened recently, right?
We are a human experiment.
Exactly.
COVID is I would say, the biggest human experiment in history.
Do you think it was an experiment for them though? Because, and I don't want to get off topic here, but I think they knew exactly what was going to happen. I mean, there's a little bit of an experimentation, but ultimately because they war gamed this, we know this because of Agenda 21. They war gamed it and they executed it flawlessly. So if you can call that an experiment.
I don't think it killed as many people as they hoped.
I don't think so either.
Yet.
Yeah,
that's true. I mean, people are still dying every day. I mean, you're seeing these people every time I pull up my Instagram or Twitter, I'm seeing all these different people that were avid advocates for the vaccine, and they're dying at very young ages, 33 years old.
Or they're getting health problems.
Yes.
They're passing out, their heart problems.
This is the same thing that's been pervasive in our society, and 2020, like you said earlier, woke everybody up. It's the death cult. It's to use science, pharmakia, magic, dabbling in areas where mankind was never intended to go. It's a Tower of Babel mentality, but in the Tower of Babel, instead of trying to reach heaven, they're trying to destroy Earth. Right. So, Leah, we got the eugenics movement. Enter Margaret Sanger.
Yeah, well, I want to give another quote from H.G. Wells. He said, it's the way of nature to slay the hindmost.
Wow.
Sterilize the failures.
Anybody that's in the back, like the caboose, you got to.
Way of nature. They want to sterilize. They want to euthanize. Euthanization was on the table, and many people wanted it more on the table. Many of your favorites, not just the Teddy Roosevelts, George Bernard Shaw, Winston Churchill. So many people, you have no idea. It was a movement.
And it was the science. It was the trust the science.
It was the science.
It was the global warming of the day. It was, well, this is where we're at.
Yes.
This is the science. We must needs do this.
You got to make it the utopia.
For example, The terrible eugenics movements of the 20th century was draped with the veneer of science. Eugenics was a tremendously popular and prestigious discipline. It wasn't a pseudoscience at all. It was supported by Nobel laureates like Herman Muller and political leaders like US President Theodore Roosevelt. There was even a chair for eugenics in University College London. Not only was the discipline of eugenics grounded on the most prestigious of sciences of the day, not the least of which being Darwin's theory of evolution, but some of the most important developments of statistics flowed out of eugenics research. The fathers of eugenics, many of whom prestigious professors at UCL, invented the correlation coefficient significance tests to better measure populational differences in the same way that Newton had invented calculus to better understand physics.
And if there are people who do not serve utopia, if they're criminals,
it makes so much sense when you think about it. Like, from an animalistic, to use your phrase, from an animalistic point of view, because we're farmers, we're pig farmers. It's, well, if there's an animal that's not fit and is going to die, you're going to cull that animal. Yeah. And so, Leah, earlier we were talking about having a better name for eugenics. There's not a single name, but you can just say it's the culling of the weaker of humans.
The radical left likes to punish people back generations, for slavery and things like that. Well, Darwin, if you read The Descent of Man, is probably the most racist book on the planet. And he does it with science, which makes it so evil. He shows how apes, and then to the black man, and then to the Asian, and then to the Hispanic, and then finally to white man. That's in The Descent of Man. That's Darwinism. And the fact that anybody, we're just going to take that and throw that out. When it comes to people that you love, My Fair Lady, this is a great, he wanted to kind of kill people. He wanted to euthanize people, wanted to sterilize people. I am with the people on the left. I don't think we can differentiate. I think we do need to kind of throw it out. I think we need to throw out the whole bathwater. Okay, and I don't think some of these things have any baby in the bathwater. I think they're just dirt. In that, along comes Margaret Sanger, and it's so funny because she comes along as a woman in a man's world. Okay, and she comes along and she goes, you know what? This whole idea of breeding better people, because they still wanted bigger families, better people.
This is what we would call the positive eugenics.
Yeah, let's breed some good people. Let's breed healthy people. She's like, you know what? The best thing that a large family can do to a child is just kill it.
That's a literal direct quote from Sanger, by the way.
Just kill it.
Mrs. Margaret Slee, president of America's Planned Parenthood Federation, maintains that European women should stop having babies for the next 10 years.
Don't you think such a theory, such a radical theory, is antisocial?
On the contrary, it seems to me that it is more practical and humane.
What about the women who want babies now and in 10 years will not be able to have babies? Rather impractical, don't you think?
Oh, John, you do ask hard questions. I should think that instead of being impractical, it is really very practical and intelligent and humane.
But Mrs. Slee, in this country, having babies is the only thing left which is both unrationed and untaxed. Do you think we really ought to stop?
Well, I suppose a subject like that is really so personal that it's entirely up to the parents to decide. But from my view, I believe that there should be no more babies.
She didn't believe in large families at all, period. Not for healthy people. Right. She was what we would call negative eugenics. There's positive eugenics, you breed the best, and then there's negative eugenics. Both of them are negative, by the way, because you're eliminating a bunch of people that you don't like. Right? It's all pretty negative. There's still some kids coming. With Margaret Sanger, she just wanted this free sex revolution, and she's pre-Kinsey, by the way. And she wants to be able to, women to just be free, whatever they can do.
When I say believe, I don't mean to believe in committing sin. Do you believe there is such a thing as sin?
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born. That, to me, is the greatest sin that people can commit.
But sin in the ordinary sense that we regard it, do you believe or do you not believe?
Well, what would they be?
Do you believe that infidelity is a sin?
Well, I'm not going to specify what I think is sin. I've stated what I think is the worst sin.
Yes, but then you asked me to say what, and I said what, and you refused to answer me?
Yes, I don't know about infidelity. It has so many personalities to it, and what a person's own belief is. I couldn't generalize any of those things.
So she starts opening up birth control clinics. She spoke at KKK meetings. This woman was a racist to the hardcore. And the fact that you have Planned Parenthood in schools, and it's the platform of the Democrat Party where you're trying to tell me that you are for multicultural society, and your founder was a ardent racist. And again, this is the rewriting of history, isn't it?
Yes. Well, and not only that, but it's interesting to note that most of the Planned Parenthoods are set up in the urban areas where most of the black population is at.
Yeah.
So she was an extreme racist. And it's interesting to note that it was shortly after Indiana performed its first eugenics case that Alfred Kinsey moved here from New Jersey.
Wow.
And set up camp in Indiana University.
Today on the Daily Dose, the American eugenics movement. When Athenian philosopher Plato wrote that an optimized society could be had by encouraging high-class people to mate, while discouraging procreation among the lower classes, he became the first thinker in human history to propose a system of forced genetic selection, later coined eugenics by British polymath and cousin to Charles Darwin, Sir Francis Galton, in his 1869 publication of Hereditary Genius, where he also coined the phrase nature versus nurture. While his genetic selection plans never took hold in his native country, Americans widely embraced the eugenics movement beginning in 1896, when Connecticut made it illegal for feeble-minded people or epileptics to marry. While the American Breeders Association was founded in 1903 to study eugenics, cereal maker John Harvey Kellogg created the Race Betterment Foundation in 1911, which established a pedigree registry and would later lead scientists and socialists to found the Eugenics Record Office, with the objective of identifying bad genetic traits closely associated with ethnicity, economics, and other social views of the day. The eugenics movement in the United States crossed into the dark side when California began sterilizing some 20,000 mentally ill patients from 1909 to 1979, under the misguided hope of eradicating mental illness. 38 states would eventually allow forced sterilizations on victims whom lawmakers deemed genetically unworthy of procreation. While in 1927, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that involuntary sterilization of a handicapped person failed to violate the U.S. Constitution, prompting Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes to declare that 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. The ruling would be overturned in 1942, but not before thousands of people were sterilized for the betterment of the human gene pool. Even more appalling, a 1976 Government Accountability Office report revealed that some 25 to 50% of Native Americans were sterilized between 1970 and 1976, largely without consent, and generally performed during other surgical procedures, such as an appendectomy.
So in these clinics, they would sterilize who they felt were feeble-minded people. Mm-hmm. And it was forced sterilization. They sterilized a whole swath of Native Americans in the 60s to 70s.
I want to take a moment to bridge a gap in your mind. But when you talk about getting your tubes tied and you talk about getting a vasectomy, it's literally sterilization. Mm-hmm. So back then, Leah just used the phrase forced sterilization, mm-hmm. but they have worked on our minds through the mind polluters so much that we will now tell you that you want this.
Well, that goes to Margaret Sanger.
You want it. You want to be sterilized. So now you are volunteering your body for a scientific experiment that is satanic at its core, but it's now accepted by society. Whereas before, we all go, oh man, if you were to force somebody to be sterilized, how awful, how terrible. But they don't realize that you have been forced through brainwashing.
Well, I would go so far as to say that they have come through it as it's inconvenient. Mm-hmm. Wait until you're married. Wait until you're supposed to be waiting until you're married, right? But wait until it's convenient for you to have a family. Yeah. Wait until you're, established in a home and a house, which, you should, right? In a sense. But at the same time, it's out of convenience.
Right.
American population has been so brainwashed mm-hmm. into going for anything that's convenient.
Yes.
And getting rid of anything that's not convenient. Exactly. Because it's convenient then if you're more financial stable. Well, if that's the case, most people won't have kids until, if they ever have them, 30s, 40s, whatever. Because the whole point of brainwashing women in particular was to put them in the workforce.
Yes, exactly.
Get women in the workforce, and I am just as guilty because I fell into that trap, right? get them in the workforce, get them working, send your kids off to daycare if you have them. Now the government's coming out with more money to provide for early childhood daycare, early childhood education, which they'll do more brainwashing the sooner they get their hands on them. It's created this whole division within families to tear the family apart, which is all part of the global agenda, right? Yeah. Was to separate the child from the parents, and then to cause problems between husband and wife. It's all been by design to take down not only the morality of our society, but also the family.
You're talking about the family. I remember being in first or second grade, and my teacher asked us what we all wanted to be when we grew up. And I didn't really have an answer. And everyone wants to be an actress or singer. But a couple little girls in the classroom said they wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. They want to be a mom. And my teacher said, well, you can, but you'll probably change your mind. Because that's not what we do anymore. A lot of little girls want to be teachers. Why? Because they're around the teachers and they feel love. When little girls are raised by loving moms and we're at home,
then you want to be a mom.
Want to be that.
Yeah.
And so you have to pull them out one by one, little by little. One of the biggest lies that they're feeding young girls today is STEM. You want to be into science, technology, engineering, and math. Because they need more people for their green agenda. They know that the boys are falling behind academically. They're not going into college at the same rate as girls. And so girls are not necessarily predisposed to science, technology, engineering, math. If we just had a battle here, girls are mostly going to try to nurse and help and nurse. And that's why nursing is filled with more women, because that is a natural inclination of women. I'm not saying that women can't be scientists or mathematicians, but women are more predisposed to caretaking roles. And so you have to brainwash a child to rewire the brain to say, no, you're really good at math. No, you're really good at science. So you have to say it, and you have to give incentives. Okay. And so now they've got girls who are getting full ride scholarships to be an engineer because they need to promote their green agenda.
But okay, so where did this all actually start? Okay, because in order to take that nurture out of women, you have to dehumanize them and desexualize them. And so you have to, so going back to Margaret Sanger, where you are no longer a nurturer because this act is not designed to bear children. It's for pleasure. For fun. And so now you're no longer a nurturer. You're just, and this goes back to gender fluidity, which we're going to talk about later. Yeah. Where we've become a genderless society. So your specific nurturing role. We associate Margaret Sanger with abortion. That's number one. But when you understand, she thought that was like, let's not even go there.
Or sterilization. Inadequate. Sterilization is okay, but it's inadequate. We're not going to get everybody in. We got millions of people. We can't get them all under in a hospital and get them.
So where is the root? And the root is in the bedroom of most modern women today. And what is it?
It's birth control. She said we have to get them birth control. And remember, it was illegal. She actually had to flee and run away because there was Comstock laws. He was an ardent Christian. It was illegal to send any sort of contraception plan or implement in the mail, or even to discuss it. It was literally illegal.
In the Christians' fight against abortion, the Comstock Act of 1873 has surfaced in our recent headlines. And personally, I'm thrilled about it. If you're not familiar, the Comstock Act, it prohibits the United States Postal Service from delivering, and I quote, any article or thing designed, adapted, or intended for producing abortion. The Comstock Act makes it a felony to mail the abortion pill mifepristone. And after Roe was overturned, abortion became a state-by-state ruling. Therefore, abortion providers figured they would just mail abortion pills into anti-abortion states. However, the Comstock Act declares that to be a felony. Needless to say, the enemies of life are calling upon the Supreme Court to repeal the Comstock Act. And the Washington Post calls the Comstock Act obsolete and misogynistic, while the New York Times calls it an arcane law. I call it a potentially life-saving law.
And people have to understand, for 2,000 years of the church fathers, if you read the church fathers, families are not limited, because God's family isn't limited. We don't limit families. We don't take potions. That's what they would call them. Right. We don't take potions to eliminate children. We don't take potions to abort children. We don't do this. I mean, it goes back to the Diache, written in AD 70, where it talks about is in the Greek, it right around the time of the apostles are alive, saying that it is morally and ethically wrong to limit children in an unnatural way. It is in God's hands. And the church fathers knew this, and every denomination knew this, and the Catholics have been the only ones that kind of stayed on the same trajectory, from Augustine to Eusebius, and even Martin Luther, and to John Calvin, the Reformers, the Pilgrims, the Founding Fathers, all had giant families. The point is, it wasn't a thought of thing. in Christianity. So they had to bring in Darwinism, and then they had to bring in survival of the fittest. And there was a battle in the churches. There was a battle between the Protestants and the Catholics, and even within the Protestant church. And at first, it was only birth control for married people and for economic reasons only. Some of the church fathers said that if you need to limit children for economic reasons, then you just don't copulate. You don't come together. If that's what you need to do, you don't do onan. You don't spill the seed. Our church fathers have gone deep, and you can read them. They're very graphic.
What do Christian denominations teach about contraception? As the various Protestant denominations formed, their founders and leaders condemned contraception in the strongest possible terms. John Calvin called the practice of contraception condemned and doubly monstrous, and saw abortion as a crime incapable of expiation. John Wesley said that contraception is very displeasing to God and the evidence of vile affections. Martin Luther called those who use contraceptives logs, stock, and swine. Virtually every leader of every Protestant denomination condemned contraception explicitly and forcefully in their sermons and writings. In fact, it is impossible to find any early Protestant minister speaking out in favor of contraception. Until 1930, all Christian churches were unanimous in their opposition to artificial means of birth prevention, except for a few small fringe groups like the Unitarians and Quakers. As recently as 1920, the Anglican Church stated, "We utter an emphatic warning against the use of unnatural means for the avoidance of conception, together with the grave dangers, physical, moral, and religious, thereby incurred, and against the evils with which the extension of such use threatens the race." The first crack in the dam occurred at the Anglican Bishops' Lambeth Conference in 1930. Their resolution stated, "Where there is a clearly felt moral obligation to limit or avoid parenthood, the method must be decided on Christian principles. The primary and obvious method is complete abstinence from intercourse. Nevertheless, in those cases where there is such a clearly felt moral obligation to limit or avoid parenthood, and where there is a morally sound reason for avoiding complete abstinence, the conference agrees that other methods may be used, provided that this is done in light of the same Christian principles." Inevitably, the expansion of approval of contraception by the Protestant churches from just the hard cases to all cases proceeded with great speed. Today, almost all of the mainline Protestant denominations accept not only contraception, but unrestrained abortion. These church denominations are paying the price for their betrayal of the natural law. They are dying out, having lost a third of their combined membership since 1970. Since the natural law was given to us by God, it cannot change based on the whims of popular opinion. No church has the authority to change the fundamental moral principles of natural law. This is why the Roman Catholic Church has consistently condemned contraception.
This guy didn't pull any punches. He called it preemptive murder. Why do you sow where the field is eager to destroy the fruit, where there are medicines of sterility, where there is murder before birth? Indeed, it is something worse than murder, and I do not know what to call it. For the woman does not kill what is formed, but prevents its formation. What then? Do you despise the gift of God and fight with his law?
But the heart began to change because the children were changed in school, and they started to change. And how did they do this? You talked about the communists in the early 1900s. It wasn't the Nazis later. It was the communists coming in. And one of the points, you guys have this on your website, one of the points of the Communist Manifesto is to get into the schools.
Yes, that was one of the things they had to take over, not only morality and the family, but then you had to get to education. And so, and that is the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, which the United Nations is run by communists. The World Economic Forum is run by communists.
Right.
So all these entities have come together and they've targeted the children, and that was one of their major goals. And even before 1900, I think it was like 10% of the children actually attended public schools.
Oh my gosh.
So it was, yeah. And then,
but they were educated.
They were
90% literacy rate, 10% went to actual public schools.
Yes. They were highly educated. And I go back to Indiana because that's where I'm from, right? So I told you they've done multiple things in Indiana. Well, one of them was they experimented in education in Gary, Indiana.
Wow.
Which is near Chicago, right? So they experimented on these children in Gary. They found out how to make it work. They took it to New York. Now I will tell you, Gary, Indiana, that county has got the lowest rates. They're in single digits
education-wise
of how many children can read proficiently and how many children can do math.
Wow.
So they have experimented on children, and they continue to experiment on them. So education is a huge pivotal piece. And even Hitler knew you have to capture the youth in order to control the country. And it doesn't take long. And look where we're at. I mean, I go to the State House to testify on bills, and you would be shocked at how many young people are down there that they parade up to the podium and they have them speaking against parents' rights.
Oh my.
It is frightening. But here we are in the current climate.
It's very much Chairman Mao.
And that's what I said. Yeah, the Red Guard. They're standing out in the hallways. They're carrying obscene signs.
Yeah.
And they're marching. They're screaming outside the chambers of the legislature.
Back here in Louisville, hundreds of students at Atherton High School walked out of class today to protest anti-LGBTQ bills proposed by lawmakers. Right now, bills restricting sex education and the use of preferred pronouns are up in the Kentucky Senate. Senate Bill 150 would give teachers the discretion to use pronouns aligned with the student's biological sex, even if that's not how the student identifies. This was an emotional day for sophomore Owen Taggy, who told us he feels like he just wants to be accepted.
I want to feel safe in an environment where I'm here every day, every week, where I learn, where I have friends who might not be in the same boat as me. But I want to be safe. That's why I'm here. That's why I protest against something that is very harmful.
The students we talked to wanted to emphasize it was a peaceful protest, and tomorrow at the Capitol, a similar rally will be held by lawmakers.
It is appalling that how far down the rabbit hole.
But it's not their fault. These kids, the children will go with how they're taught.
Train up a child in the way that they should go, and when they're old, they won't depart.
So when you remove the foundation, God from the foundation of education, you remove all education. We had the New England Primer in America. That was the primary textbook of our founding fathers besides the Bible. But to just use the Bible, obviously, as your textbook is not what our founding fathers did. They were highly, highly educated. They knew several languages. I think John Quincy Adams could read and speak fluently 5 languages. But in the New England Primer, the alphabet, I love. A is for Adam. L was for licentiousness. D is for debauchery. And they used biblical principles to teach everything. Because when you see the world through the lens of the gospel, then everything makes sense. It's his story. So but with the communists, and we know this with Chairman Mao, all the olds, the 4 olds, they get rid of the old ways, the old thoughts, the old religion. They throw it all out. And the communists try to creating a vacuum that they can fill. And this is the Carnegie Rockefeller Foundations. They actually met together. Norman Dodd has the dictaphone tapes of these meetings in the early 1900s. How do you control a population? We know no other means than war to control a population than education. So we have to grab a hold of the education. Well, they went to the 2 leading historians of the time. It was a husband and wife team, and asked them to rewrite some history books for them, and they wouldn't do it. And so they went and they grabbed a bunch of guys who would do it, and they began to rewrite history through a different lens. And you'll notice it's on the nightly news every night.
In 1982, G. Edward Griffin interviewed Norman Dodd, an American banker and bank manager who worked as a financial advisor and served as chief investigator in 1953 for the Special Committee on Tax-Exempt Foundations. He was tasked with investigating tax-exempt nonprofits. His findings were shocking. Not only did he report that in the early 1900s, the men on the board of the Carnegie Endowment conspired to push America into World War I, but also pushed to keep her there longer than necessary for their own financial gain. Greedy with a lust for power, they sought to keep their newfound control. The Carnegie Endowment joined with the Rockefeller Foundation to rewrite American history and control education. As Rockefeller once famously said, "I do not want a nation of thinkers. I want a nation of workers."
We are now at the year 1908, which was the year that the Carnegie began operations. And in that year, the trustees, meeting for the first time, raised a specific question, which they discussed throughout the balance of the year in a very learned fashion. And the question is there any means known more effective than war, assuming you wish to alter the life of an entire people? And they conclude that no more effective means than war to that end is known to humanity. So then in 1909 they raised the second question and discussed it, namely, how do we involve the United States in a war? If they answer that question as follows: we must control the State Department. And the And then that very naturally raises the question of how do we do that? And they answer it by saying, we must take over and control the diplomatic machinery of this country. And finally they resolve to aim at that as an objective. Then time passes, and we are eventually in a war, which would have been World War I. And finally, of course, the war is over. At that time, their interest shifts over to preventing what they call a reversion of life in the United States to what it was prior to 1914, when World War I broke out. And they arrive at that point, they come to the conclusion that to prevent a reversion, we must control education in the United States. And they realize that that's a pretty big task. So to them, it is too big for them alone, so they approach the Rockefeller Foundation with the suggestion that that portion of education which could be considered domestic be handled by the Rockefeller Foundation, and that portion which is international should be handled by the endowment. And they then decide that the key to the success of these two operations lay in an alteration in the teaching of American history. So they approach 4 of the then most prominent teachers of American history in the country, people like Charles and Mary Bird, and their suggestion to them is, will they alter the manner in which they present this subject, and they get turned down flat. So they then decide that it is necessary for them to do, as they say, build our own stable of historians. And they take this 20 potential teachers of American history to London, and there they're briefed into what is expected of them when, as and if they secure appointments. And that culminates in a 7-volume book study, the last volume of which is, of course, in essence, a summary of the contents of the other 6. And the essence of the last volume is the future of this country belongs to collectivism administered with characteristic American efficiency.
Economics. So if your religion is now economics, then you're going to limit children. If your religion is the gospel of Jesus Christ, you're going to go to him and say, hey, God, what do you want us to do? And so you create a new religion, and it's, okay, how's the economy doing? What's the stocks at? And that becomes the religion, the deciding force.
It's true. And I would just add, I just finished reading Mao's China by Xi Van Fleet.
Wow.
And she talks about how when Mao took over, they stopped all the schooling. They shut all the schools down, and they sent the children out into the countryside to work in the farms.
Wow.
And when they brought them back, they had no textbooks. The only thing they had was Mao's Little Red Book.
Wow.
And that's all they learned to read, and all they learned to recite. And everything in the school was all Mao propaganda.
Wow.
Big pictures of Mao, right? So that's how he re-engineered the thought process in the education system to create that Red Guard, which is exactly what's happening here, because the kids more than likely do not use a textbook. And whatever is being brought to them on their iPad, the parents have no idea.
Yeah.
And it can change in a matter of just a few seconds, right?
Yeah.
All you do is flip the internet and you have no idea what your child just read.
Yes.
I mean, so we are living through that process right now, and it's helping to wake people up we'll be able to push back.
Yes. To push back. And, I think the hardest place to push back, I will tell you, is the birth control and the self-sterilization of society.
Right.
That's the one where Christians bristle. They turn you off. And I say, don't turn me off. Just listen to the words of Margaret Sanger.
In the eyes of some, Margaret Sanger has been a heroine. In the eyes of others, she's been a destructive force.
In her own words, Sanger pushed for a society that limited births to those she deemed fit to have children.
Well, I think the greatest sin in the world is bringing children into the world that have disease from their parents, that have no chance in the world to be a human being, practically. Delinquents, prisoners, all sorts of things just marked when they're born.
In 1916, Sanger opened the country's first birth control clinic. As a member of the American Eugenics Society, she advocated improving the genetic composition of humans through controlled reproduction of different races and classes. She often wrote about the issue in the journal she founded, called the Birth Control Review. In 1919, writing,
I personally believe in the sterilization of the feeble-minded, the insane, and the syphilitic. The most urgent problem today is how to limit and discourage the over-fertility of the mentally and physically defective.
Many point to a 1923 New York Times interview as proof of Sanger's racist motives, in which she referred to people as weeds, saying,
It means the release and cultivation of the better racial elements in our society and the gradual suppression, elimination, and eventual extirpation of defective stocks, those human weeds which threaten the blooming of the finest flowers of American civilization.
In a 1939 letter to Clarence Gable about the Negro Project, Margaret Sanger wrote, "We do not want word to go out that we want to exterminate the Negro population, and the minister is the man who can straighten out that idea if it ever occurs to any of their more rebellious members." In 1932, Margaret Sanger published a work called A Plan for Peace. In it she states, "The main objects of the Population Congress would be to apply a stern and rigid policy of sterilization and segregation to that grade of population whose progeny is tainted or whose inheritance is such that objectionable traits may be transmitted to offspring, to give certain dysgenic groups in our population their choice of segregation or sterilization." In a 1919 edition of Margaret Sanger's magazine, The Birth Control Review, it states, "Eugenics without birth control seems to us a house builded upon the sands. It is at the mercy of the rising stream of the unfit."
I always say, go back to the foundation. Was it God? Did God bring this in to the nation? Did he? We know that Margaret Sanger was a racist. We know that she was a eugenicist. And we know that she hated Christianity. Who is the mother of Planned Parenthood? What is the main goal of Planned Parenthood? It's birth control. They make a lot of money through abortions. And I think Christians and the Republican Party make a good platform out of abortion. Obviously, we found this year that most Republicans are not very pro-life, and that we just, in Ohio, something that's very dear to our heart, the radical left came in and convinced Republicans to vote for the most radical pro-abortion, a constitutional amendment in America, in Ohio.
I will hit on that. How do you get a society to go from family to now we're going to allow abortion up to birth and transgenderism, the mutilation of body parts on children? We get there because a lot of the church is swallowing the poison. And that goes back to the birth control that Margaret Sanger, if you are literally, whether you're getting a vasectomy or you have your tubes tied or you're taking birth control, all of that is in the exact same category of death.
Where did it come from? That's the question. Did it come from church fathers?
Did it ever come from God?
It never came from God.
Because anything that's not done by faith is sin.
So you've got Marie Stoops. She opens up the first Planned Parenthood clinic in the UK. She wants to eliminate, she's calling all these women, all these poor women, and she's like, I want you to, here, take this birth control. We don't want you to have any children. She was such an ardent eugenicist that her son married a woman who was short-sighted, and she disinherited him. Because she didn't want to have short-sighted grandchildren. So we have Margaret Sanger is the mother of birth control here. Marie Stopes is the birth control mother in the UK.
Enter one of the most monstrous women the United Kingdom ever produced, Marie Stopes. She is Britain's Margaret Sanger, opening the first birth control clinic for women in England, a racist and ardent eugenist. Her society was called the Society for Constructive Birth Control and Racial Progress. Two of the basic principles of the CBC were, the haphazard production of children by ignorant, coerced, or diseased mothers is profoundly detrimental to the race. Many men and women should be prevented from procreating children at all because of their individual ill health or the diseased and degenerate nature of the offspring that they may be expected to produce. Time Ghost History, popular YouTube channel, does a phenomenal job of giving us more information on the woman the internet tried to erase.
On trial in the first months of 1923 are sexual pleasure and eugenics. In England, a controversial feminist takes a Catholic doctor to court for libel. Maurice Stopes is accusing Halliday Sutherland of defamatory remarks in his 1922 book, Birth Control, a statement of Christian doctrine against the Neo-Malthusians. Maurice Stopes is one of the most prominent English intellectuals of the era. Formerly an academic botanist, Maurice Stopes provided a language to talk about sexuality completely divorced from reproduction. It sold over 2,000 copies in its first 2 weeks of publication, 17,000 after a year, and by now in 1923, over 200,000. Of course, to divorce sexuality and reproduction, you need birth control. Married Love is one of the first popular books to openly promote this, and it quickly becomes Stopes' life work. She campaigns on it with great passion, publishing frequently and regularly organizing public meetings. In 1920, she even circulated a letter to attendees of the upcoming Lambeth Conference, the decennial assembly of bishops to define Anglican doctrine, where she tells them of the divine message she received. My lords, I speak to you in the name of God. You are his priests, I am his prophet. I speak to you of the mysteries of man and woman. Unsurprisingly, the bishops ignored her message. Unperturbed, she set up England's first birth control clinic in a working-class area of London in 1921, which by now is a roaring success. It is run by Stopes, but staffed by trained nurses, and a female doctor is available at all times. Services are provided at cost, or even for free if the poorer women can't afford them. And the emphasis is on sex education and contraception rather than medical procedure. All this, just by itself, is hugely controversial, that a woman is openly advocating not only sexual pleasure for the sake of sexual pleasure, but also a means for women to control their reproduction. Well, this goes against everything Christianity teaches about sexual relations and a woman's place within them. This sin alone forms much of Halliday Sutherland's supposed defamation of her. But there's more to it than that. Stopes doesn't just believe in birth control, but also in controlling who can give birth. In other words, she is a eugenicist. Eugenics, or at least population control, is an inherent part of the early birth control movement. As you'll know from our Season 1 episode, Sex, Drugs, and the Right to Vote, the ideas of English cleric Thomas Robert Malthus are very influential just here. His 1798 publication, An Essay on the Principle of Population, predicted that birth rates would one day overtake food production to such an extent that famine, the breakdown of social order, and war would come with it, limiting unwanted births, and so alleviating the burden it places on individual mothers and society as a whole is a cornerstone of the birth control movement. And the biggest proponents of birth control, people like Stopes, believe not only that population growth should be controlled as a general principle, but that certain groups' contribution towards population should be controlled altogether. Marie justifies why in her 1920 book, Radiant Motherhood. Society allows the diseased, the racially negligent, the thriftless, the careless, the feeble-minded, the very lowest and worst members of the community to produce innumerable tens of thousands of stunted, warped, and inferior infants. If they live, a large proportion of these are doomed from their very physical inheritance to be, at the best, but partly self-supporting, and thus to drain the resources of those classes above them which have a sense of responsibility. If the good in our race is not to be swamped and destroyed by the debased, as the fine tree by the parasite, this prolific depravity must be curbed. Such words aren't as controversial as one might think. Eugenics was once a marginal idea, but it has become a mainstream preoccupation, perhaps even the zeitgeist of intellectual circles of the 1920s. Like so many things, the Great War was the catalyzing moment for this. What shocked so many about it was not just the quantity of lives lost, but also the quality. The finest men, the bravest, the fittest, the most superior racial stock were slaughtered on the battlefields, apparently leaving behind a swarm of paupers, degenerates, and invalids free to carry on their reckless breeding. This pessimism about the biological decline of civilization is prevalent throughout Europe and America, but it's felt particularly strongly in Britain, which is already the birthplace of the modern eugenics movement, and where its reputation as the center of civilization is held dear. Even before the war had ended, then Prime Minister David Lloyd George referred to Army medical categorizations when he closed a September 1918 speech saying, "I solemnly warn my countrymen that you cannot maintain an A1 empire with a C3 population." This outlook is shared by politicians and intellectuals across the ideological spectrum, from utopian socialists like H.G. Wells, to rational economists, John Maynard Keynes, to young politicians like Neville Chamberlain. All have different ideas about what the future should look like, but all believe that biological improvement of the race is the only way to secure it. And Stopes sees birth control as the way to make that happen. As she wrote herself in 1921, the campaign for birth control is not merely of eugenic value, but is practically identical in ideal with the final aims of eugenics. Only by intelligent mastery of the procreative powers can the great mass of humanity be awakened to the great responsibility of parenthood.
She's an ardent eugenicist, and it's a fervor for her. Bring in all the poor, all the feeble-minded. And it's not just her, because you have Winston stinking Churchill, who wants to sterilize all the feeble-minded, all the lesser people. And he was the one who helped save us from the Nazis. Well, did he really?
The Eugenics Education Society was founded in 1907. It argued, among other things, that poverty was rooted in the genetic deficiency of the working classes, and that the feeble-minded should be prevented from having children. 30 years before he led Britain to victory against Nazi Germany, Winston Churchill was honorary vice president of the Eugenics Education Society. In 1910, Churchill warned Prime Minister Herbert Henry Asquith about the very terrible danger to the race posed by the multiplication of the unfit, and as Home Secretary, Churchill went on to propose a series of eugenic policies, including forced sterilisation and the prevention of marriage between those judged mentally unfit. He also planned labour colonies where the criminally feeble-minded could be detained. Long before anyone knew Hitler's name, Churchill was using the sort of language that would later be used by the Nazis to describe those who failed to live up to the standards of the master race. Around the same time, eugenics took root in the United States. In 1906, the inventor of cornflakes, J.H. Kellogg, founded the Race Betterment Foundation in Michigan. In 1911, the eugenicist Charles Davenport founded the Eugenics Record Office in New York. Kellogg and Davenport believed that eugenic policies could alleviate the economic burden caused by certain undesirable members of society, especially the disabled and the mentally ill. They enjoyed the financial backing of huge corporate foundations, including the Carnegie Institute and the Rockefeller Foundation. They held conferences, printed adverts for eugenic marriages, and published their research in journals and newspapers. The campaigns worked. In 1907, the state of Indiana passed the first compulsory sterilization law in the world. By 1924, 15 different states had passed similar legislation. These laws were passed in the hope that those deemed unfit to reproduce and the mentally ill wouldn't be able to pass on their inferior genes to the next generation. Between 1907 and 1963, over 65,000 people were sterilized against their will. Relative to the American population, a disproportionate number of those targeted were Black, Hispanic, and Native American women. This demonstrates just how quickly the idea of eradicating negative traits was unmasked as a racist agenda. Eugenics led American policymakers to acts even more atrocious than forced sterilization. A 1911 Carnegie report explored 18 different potential methods for removing defective genetic attributes and proposed euthanasia at number 8. One influential American textbook, Applied Eugenics by Paul Popenoe of the American Eugenics Society, argued that the first method which presents itself to cleanse the gene pool is execution. Its value in keeping up the standard of the race should not be underestimated. These ideas were actually put into practice in some states. One mental institution in Lincoln, Illinois, fed its patients milk that had been infected with tuberculosis in order that the genetically weak among them would be killed off. For eugenicists across the globe, the United States was the shining example of what eugenics could achieve. In Mein Kampf, published in 1925, Hitler lavished praise on American eugenicists. He claimed that he had studied with great interest the laws of several American states concerning prevention of reproduction by people whose progeny would be of no value or be injurious to the racial stock. Hitler and Churchill agreed. America was doing a great job of